Despite the fact that there are no signs of the war and genocide ending inside of the Gaza Strip, lots of people and lots of parties are talking about the day after and who should run the Gaza Strip and what should happen. From an Israeli perspective, they don't want the Palestinian resistance to be there. They want to disarm the Palestinian resistance. They also don't want the Palestinian Authority of the West Bank to control the Gaza Strip. And they want a local force that they deal with under full Israeli security control. So Israel, in fact, doesn't want anything Palestinian or anything officially Palestinian inside of the Gaza Strip, and they want to ultimately control everything in relation to the security of what is called the day after inside of the Gaza Strip. Regardless of the fact that the debate should be of the day after Israel, not the day after Gaza, and how to dismantle an entity that's been committing genocide and disarm it and make sure that it never poses a threat, not only to Gaza, but the rest of the world as well, that is where the talks are going now. The Americans are saying, we want to get this over and done with by the end of the year. Israel is being very shady and unclear about its plans, but Benjamin Netanyahu is stating that he's going up until the finish and eliminating Hamas, as he claims. And now even Bezalel Smotrich is saying that they're going to continue this genocide and they're going to enforce a starvation campaign up until people die of hunger or thirst or starvation in the areas that they want to operate in. But one of the main countries involved in all of this, and also in the calls for the day after and the management of the Gaza Strip, is Egypt. Now, Israel is saying something very interesting. They're saying that Egypt is not just taking a role now of a mediator, it's taking off the gloves and intends to take control of Gaza. What do they mean by taking control of Gaza, and where is Israel getting this information from? Well, according to reports in Israel and other Arab media too, this report is confirming that Egypt already begun training 10,000 Palestinian soldiers. They began training hundreds to lead up to 10,000 soldiers, although Israel does not agree with the concept and with the idea of the Egyptians taking control over the Palestinian Authority forces to later on go to the Gaza Strip, because Israel doesn't want any Palestinian Authority forces inside of Gaza. But they're still doing that despite the Israeli refusal to have any sort of participation from the Authority of the West Bank inside of Gaza. But this move coming from Egypt is clearly indicating that they have other plans, and they want to push for a Palestinian Authority-led Gaza Strip to lead to a solution. Much of the talk now, whether when it comes to the mediators or other countries as well, is about the fact that there needs to be an all-out solution and a Palestinian state that would come after the genocide ends and after the ceasefire and the deal both have been accomplished and everything is fine. Which means that they wouldn't just be looking at a solution temporarily for Gaza, they would be looking at a long-term solution for the region. Hence why Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't also want the Palestinian Authority of the West Bank, despite the fact that the Palestinian Authority of the West Bank is under Israeli control and doesn't do anything that would even harm Israel in the West Bank. They enabled Israel to expand. They allowed Israel to do so many things. But the fact that they would potentially have control inside of the Gaza Strip would mean that certain diplomatic efforts to reach Palestinian statehood, because of the fact that Palestinian Authority controls both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, would increase even further. Benjamin Netanyahu's predecessor, Ariel Sharon, and his plan to withdraw from Gaza came following serious calculations. One of these calculations was the fierce attacks that the Zionist squatters were getting from the Palestinian resistance in Gaza, and there weren't many of them. But there was also a bigger plan, and that bigger plan was to split Gaza from the West Bank and make sure that they both have different authorities, so that the prospect of a Palestinian state, at least on the 1967 borders, would become more and more difficult. Now, the Palestinian Authority of the West Bank tried to play ball with Israel and hand in hand with Israel to conduct wars against Hamas later on so that the Palestinian Authority can go back. But ultimately, Israel wanted the split rather than having an authority that controls both sides. Divide and rule. So, Netanyahu, from his perspective, he already stated multiple times, he will not allow Hamas and he will not allow Fatah to control the Gaza Strip. It needs to be an independent force. But now, with this report coming from Israel, clearly Egypt has other plans for the future, at least in coordination with some elements from the Palestinian side. How and can that work with the Palestinian resistance? Because the Palestinian resistance said multiple times that we will not allow any force to come without consent, and it would be treated as occupation. But if they would come with consent, that means they wouldn't have a problem with it. Because the idea is the Egyptians would train the forces, they would come with them to Gaza. Some Egyptian forces would be in Gaza, train and hand over the security matters to the Palestinian Authority that would be there in Gaza afterwards, before the talks about elections happening. So from Hamas's perspective, there wouldn't be a problem. In addition to that, we had an example in recent months, especially after the second ceasefire took place in January. There were Egyptian forces on some of the areas where people were moving back to the north from the south, especially in vehicles. We saw many images and footage of Egyptian forces dealing with the Palestinian population alongside American forces who took a step back, who were just monitoring, observing, dealing with other security matters as well. And that was in coordination with Hamas. So that option could be there on the table. The way Israel would want to portray it, though, is as if Egypt is doing something behind its back to try and justify either more criticism towards Egypt coming from the Israeli public and a legitimization of more aggression towards Egypt, or portray Egypt as a force that is actually going to be an occupation force or a new occupation force inside of Gaza, regardless of the position of the Palestinian resistance, so that they can create tensions between the Palestinian side and the Egyptian side too. And that is a very important note, because this is where it gets tricky and Israel wants to play at this part in relation to the division. So whereas, for example, Egypt had certain positions that were criticized, like not forcing aid into the Gaza Strip, seeing the genocide happening, not taking decisive action to stop it. They also had other positions where they prevented the ethnic cleansing from happening by not agreeing to any deal that would allow Palestinians into the Sinai Peninsula, therefore expelling the population out. They also refused to participate with the United States in the Red Sea in a coalition against Ansarullah. And the Egyptian president also refused to meet with the American president after he was also suggesting again 1 year later to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians from the Gaza Strip, after the Egyptians showed their position clearly to the Biden administration and to Antony Blinken at the time in the famous press conference that the Egyptian president had with him. So there is legitimate criticism towards Egypt, and there are also actions that they need to be supported with and encouraged with, preventing the genocide from happening, not participating in a coalition against Ansarullah, and also refusing to meet the American president. But where Israel wants to take this debate to, or argument, is to a level of internal battle, either internally inside of Egypt or between the Palestinian side and the Egyptian side, to cause unnecessary frictions and tensions with the Palestinian resistance and the Palestinian mediators too. Why now? Well, it's because there was a recent statement coming from the Qatari mediators, and there was a joint statement as well with the Egyptian officials and the Qatari delegation too, talking about the fact that, well, hinting without directly criticizing or naming Israel, that they are making the attempts fail time after time, but we will always be keen to try and reach a solution. So the mediators are taking a more anti-Israel position than Israel would like, despite the fact that, by the way, the Qatari and Egyptian mediators did a lot of work to try and reach a ceasefire. They constantly come up with new proposals, and Israel constantly rejects it. Why? Because Israel wants its way only, and it wants to buy time. And it's unclear whether the mediators from the Egyptian side and the Qatari side fully comprehend that fact, but they build on the fact that, well, there were ceasefires before, there was relief, there was aid going in, something is better than nothing, and they're continuing based on that approach because they don't want anything that would escalate things even further. But in relation to those ceasefires, that message that came from the Qatari and Egyptian delegations in relation or hinting directly at Israel, making these negotiations fail and not having a genuine will to reach a ceasefire, shows clearly that there is no end to the genocide on the horizon.